What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here with another installment in my Force 5 series where I am playing at least 5 games with each of the new leaders from the Twilight of the Republic set. This time we have Ahsoka Tano Snips. Let's get into it. So Ahsoka is a leader that, to be honest, I didn't like all that much when I first saw her. She is a 5-cost aggression heroism leader, and she is a 3/6 on deployment, but she has coordinate. So as long as you control at least 3 or more units, she gets +2 power, becoming a 5/6. Her leader side ability allows you to exhaust her to attack with a unit, and it gets +1 power for this attack. And it is worth noting that unlike some similar abilities, this works whether you're attacking a unit or whether you're attacking the enemy base. So I would say that both of her abilities are pretty good. The potential of being a 5/6 leader at 5 is very strong. There's other leaders that are 4/6 or 3/7. You're looking at those things where it's about 10 points of stats. And so Ahsoka potentially landing with 11, as well as with some good traits. Force, Jedi, and Republic all have some synergies. So potentially Ahsoka's pretty scary, but you have to have coordinate enabled. And that's really the question. Can you do that in a reliable enough way in order to have this leader be really good? Well, I was testing it out, and I actually liked what I found here. So this is my Force 5 Ahsoka Tano deck after having played several testing games. This is a green-red heroism aggro deck, and that's a familiar combination to people who have played with Sabine Explosives Artist, with Sabine Galvanized Revolutionary before, one of the more popular aggro decks in the game. But there are some interesting twists. So I'm using the new Droid Manufactory base that creates 2 battle droid tokens when you deploy. I have not as many of the rebel synergies. In fact, I don't have any of the direct rebel synergies, though I still do have a lot of good rebel aggro cards in this build. And I have some new set 3 options to try and keep the pressure on, swarm the opponent, and close things out with a win. So yeah, there are a bunch of units, multiple small units. It's kind of the name of the game here. You get those batch brothers to get a clone when they deploy, or when they're played. You get the clone tokens from the base, and we do of course have For a Cause I Believe In to try and close things out as well. So some very cool stuff here. And yeah, so here are some of the new cards that are just small aggro units. Echo is an interesting case. He's a 2-cost 2/2, which is not very good, but he has coordinate and becomes 4/4. So if you can get that coordinate enabled, he's actually really strong for his cost. We have Anakin's Interceptor here, which is 2 for a 2/3, kind of a decent stat line. But while your base has 15 or more damage on it, it gets +2 power, and this is great in races. I actually had a game earlier today where it turned into a race scenario, and this ability on Anakin's Interceptor got me the win. Having those extra stats allowed me to get just enough damage out to close the game. So that can be a very handy ability, and it is also worth noting that unlike the Raid 2 on Green Squadron A-Wing, the bonus stats on Anakin's Interceptor do apply on the defense. So if you have Anakin's Interceptor and you have 15 or more damage on your base, and your opponent brings out the Falcon or something to try and defeat it, the Falcon will take 4 damage and be defeated itself in that combat. So that's worth knowing. And then the Batch Brothers, I already touched on them a bit, but they are a 2/1 unit that makes a Clone Trooper token, which is a 2/2 unit. So they're a good way to not only get some stats on the field that's difficult to deal with standard removal cards, but it also helps you get closer to enabling that coordinate. So those are some cards, though. Of course, we also have classics like Battlefield Marine and Sabine Wren Explosives Artist. Speaking of Sabine, one interesting thing that I found in my testing is that I had a bunch of games where Sabine's ability, while there are at least the 3 aspects among other friendly units, this unit can't be attacked. I had several games where that was actually relevant. Now, in the past, I've played Sabine a bunch in other builds, and one of the things that's interesting about Sabine Green is that it tends not to actually run all that many green units. Like, you'll have Battlefield Marine, you'll have Bright Hope, but those decks are normally pretty heavy on the heroism units and on the aggression units. And in this deck, there was more of a mix of aspects, and it seemed like Sabine's defensive ability was active more often than I was used to seeing. It is also worth noting that this deck even has 2 villainy units with those battle droids that you get when you deploy. So a buffed Sabine can be a little difficult for opponents to deal with at times. at times. It's not going to be something that's reliable. It's not going to be something that's active every single game, but it's good to consider, maybe throwing that General's Blade or even Ahsoka's Padawan lightsaber onto Sabine is going to get you some good value. But it is worth noting many opponents will forget this. I think I had to remind my opponent every time, they would declare the attack and I'd just be like, nope, can't be attacked or whatever. And so if you are going to try and take advantage of this, you need to make sure that you don't forget it yourself. And it's funny because Sabine is a really good card even without that ability being relevant, but now that it is relevant, that's just some nice extra value from a card that I think is already a star. Okay. So Droid Manufactory, that's going to be, I know this is going to be controversial. I know a lot of people are going to make decks with Energy Conversion Lab, and to be honest, there's some great stuff you can do with Energy Conversion Lab. I don't think Energy Conversion Lab is bad. For instance, Energy Conversion Lab for Isla Secura, that's a great play. And it's even possible to me that the Energy Conversion Lab version of this deck would end up being better, but I wanted to play with the new Droid Manufactory, and the battle droids that you get from it seemed like they were really interesting because they gave you coordinate more or less automatically. So Ahsoka doesn't have coordinate, doesn't have a leader ability or those bonus stats if you don't have coordinate up. And this base means that when you deploy Ahsoka with Ahsoka herself and the two droids, you instantly have coordinate even if your board was wiped. And I had at least one game that was like that in testing. Ahsoka deploying onto an empty board, but because of these tokens from the Droid Manufactory, she had coordinate anyway. And, the tokens themselves aren't great, but they're there. They can get some value. And if you have Commander Cody out, who I'm going to discuss more in a bit, they even have some kind of decent stats as 2/2s instead of 1/1s. But, every little bit helps, and I've definitely done some damage with attacks from those droids as well. They can also make good targets for Heroic Sacrifice, since you don't really care if they're defeated. Cody and Red 3 are the two kind of buff cards to help out your board. So Cody is a 5-cost 4/4 with Overwhelm. So when attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base, and he gives all your other units that same Overwhelm keyword and +1/+1 as long as you control 3 or more units. Now, it is worth noting he does not buff himself with that +1/+1. And like Red 3, Cody's stats are actually not really very good for cost, but the buffs help a lot. And it is worth noting Red 3, I know it's a Rebel card and thematically useful with Rebels, but Red 3 does not actually need the Rebel trait. He just needs the Heroism aspect, and most of the units here are Heroism. There are a few exceptions. And as I said earlier, neither of these have good stats on their own, but Cody synergizes really well just with Ahsoka's flip and with the base there, because, you flip, you have those droids, now coordinates enabled, and you play Cody, and now you also have that buff enabled with the Overwhelm and the bonus stats, both for Ahsoka herself and for any other units you might have on the board. So these are some nice pieces of the puzzle to get those multiple small units buffed up and more threatening to the opponent. There are also 3 single target buffs available. So the ones that I was discussing earlier are kind of buffs for the whole board. You also have Huyang, Ashoka's Padawan lightsaber, and General's Blade. So of these 3, I like the first one the most. This Jedi droid not only buffs a unit, but he also adds another unit on the board for your coordinate count. So, and it's interesting. So if you compare him to a wing leader, he works on anything, unlike a wing leader, which only works on rebels, and his stats are better than wing leader. But if he is removed from play, the other unit loses its stats, and that is worse than wing leader against some things, and it's better against other things. So, for example, if you're playing against a blue villain control deck, if you buff your unit with wing leader and then they play Power of the Dark Side, you're like, okay, I'll lose this bad quality wing leader, and my unit is still buffed and on the field. That's pretty good for you. If they play that Power of the Dark Side and they kill Huyang, that's not so good for you because now you just lost the stats. On the other hand, if you play Huyang and they waylay the unit that he buffed, well, okay, the body that's left on the field is stronger than if you play a wing leader and they waylay the unit that was just buffed. So, it can be a little different. It is a little annoying that he doesn't have the heroism aspect for a cause I believe in, but sometimes that's just how it goes. And I do think that Huyang is a good addition to the deck. Ahsoka's Padawan lightsaber is best when played on Ahsoka herself, because then you can immediately attack with a unit, and it doesn't have to be Ahsoka. You can play this on Ahsoka and then attack with a different unit. But I've also had situations where I've played this on Sabine, as I was mentioning earlier, with her ability to avoid being attacked. and it can just go on a bunch of units for some extra damage. The fact that it only costs 1 makes it pretty flexible and easy to play. Then last we have the General's Blade, which is 3 for a +3/+3, attached to a non-vehicle unit. If attached unit is a Jedi, which is Ahsoka and also amusingly Huyang, it gains on attack the next unit you play this phase costs 2 less. And that's a great synergy for this deck because this deck wants to be spreading out with multiple units. So I've had some times when I've been able to get the General's Blade out on Ahsoka on her flip turn, swing, and then play an extra unit that I wouldn't have been able to play otherwise and really flood the board. You can also potentially play it on a unit that isn't a Jedi just for the bonus stats and pushing more damage through, though in that situation you need to be wary of waylay and or any upgrade removal. So those single target buffs are also a nice piece of the puzzle here. And in the sideboard, we have a lot of discard tech. So the Force Throw, Pillage, and Senatorial Corvette. Now, some might be wondering, why isn't Force Throw in the main board? I like Force Throw in main board in decks where I have multiple units that enable it. In this deck, Huyang may be Jedi, but he's not Force. Ahsoka is actually the only Force unit in the build. I was testing Shock T earlier, but I didn't actually like her all that much in this composition. So with Ahsoka being the only Force unit in the build, you're just not enabling Force Throw as reliably as with the decks where I like to main deck it. But it's still there in the sideboard in case you do want to go for that discard plan. Sorry, I advanced the slide too early. Pillage is a classic discard card, but the one that actually impressed me the most of these three is the Senatorial Corvette, which is a 5-cost 5/4 space unit with aggression heroism. It has Saboteur. When this unit attacks, ignore Sentinel and defeat the defender's shields, and when defeated, each opponent discards a card from their hand. This is a nice unit to play to open up an additional threat in the space arena, and if and when the opponent manages to deal with it, it costs them an extra card. I've actually really liked this card to the point where I would consider main decking it. It's not currently in there, but I could see it potentially coming there as the deck evolves. It was quite successful in some testing where I had it cited in. So Senatorial Corvette, I'm a fan. Okay. So that's the basic overview of this build, but there are some other things to potentially try out. So first up, I have Fleet Lieutenant here. Fleet Lieutenant is representing not just the Fleet Lieutenant himself, but also a bunch of other Rebel synergy cards like Wing Leader and Medal Ceremony and so on. I think it would be interesting to test a version of this deck that leaned more into the Rebel synergy just because those Rebel synergy cards are very effective. So you would have units more along the lines of what you would see in a Sabine deck and so on. Now, I do think, I'm not sure how good that would be in large part because one of the best ways to use Wing Leader is to use it on Sabine, and you can't use Wing Leader on Ahsoka because she's Republic. But I think Fleet Lieutenant at least might be interesting, at least with the early units you're playing, and it does seem potentially worth testing in a more Rebel-heavy version of the deck. Sword and Shield maneuver here actually strikes me as an interesting option. I think the ideal with it would be that you attack with Ahsoka, then you play this, and it buffs any troopers that you have on the field, including the droids that you get with the Droid Manufactory, while also forcing the opponent to attack into Ahsoka, who hopefully has powerful stats and will be a big obstacle for their units and allow you to get some more damage in. Haven't tested that, but it seems like it has potential. And then the 332nd Stalwart is a nice cheap unit. If you can enable Coordinate, it's a 1-cost 2/3, which is pretty sweet. I don't have it currently in the build, but I could see it making it into a future version potentially. There are a lot of ways that you could mess around with some of the smaller units. Right now I have the Spec Force Soldier, for instance, but I think the 332nd Stalwart could conceivably replace it in some version of the build. So those are my thoughts on Ahsoka here, and I had fun with this deck. Now, would I take this to a tournament instead of Sabine? To be honest, I probably wouldn't. I feel like Sabine is more honed as an aggro deck, but what I will say is I'm not convinced Ahsoka isn't good. Like, I thought this was actually like a promising and interesting deck, and I could easily see a scenario where Ahsoka ends up being a competitive deck with more refinement. Now, I would want to, I'd want to play more, figure out some matchups, iron some stuff out, but I actually think Ahsoka is pretty high potential, which surprises me because I was a little skeptical of her and of the coordinate mechanic more broadly from the early previews. But I don't know. I was liking what I was seeing, at least in the early tests, and maybe with more and more refinement, it would end up having some glaring weaknesses, but I don't know. I liked this. So yeah, I thought it was a kind of a pleasant surprise for a leader that, I think is very thematic, and I think is a character that a lot of people like. I was a little worried that she might be kind of consigned to the, this is a like for fun character realm, but I don't know. I think Ahsoka can put up a real fight here. I liked what I was seeing, and I could potentially see some other aspects being good too. That's the other thing that's cool about this. Like, just this Ahsoka Droid Manufactory deck already seemed like it had a bunch of stuff to explore, but there's other Ahsoka, like, how about Ahsoka ECL? How about Ahsoka Yellow? How about Ahsoka Blue? There are a bunch of versions of this deck that I think would be interesting to try out, and I don't know. I'm excited to see where it goes and whether someone comes up with one that's going to be really competitive. It's hard to say, but I think Ahsoka has some potential, and I was pleasantly surprised to be doing this testing and seeing some cool stuff. Okay. So what do you guys think? Do you think, oh, Tower, you're crazy, Ahsoka's terrible. Do you think I'm crazy for running Droid Manufactory? I gotta say, I think the Droid Manufactory has some pretty good synergy here. You know, personally, that's my opinion. But you know, maybe you disagree. Maybe you think another composition is going to do it better. I'd be interested to hear from you. Also, if you have any suggestions for what leader I should cover next in this Force 5 series, feel free to let me know. I'm taking suggestions in the comments below. And tomorrow, if all goes well and the internet works and all that, I will be casting the Star City Games, the SCG Con Star City Games 2K prize pool event for Star Wars Unlimited TCG tomorrow at I believe it's SCG Columbus. And I will be over on the McClunky Gaming channel, and I will link to them in the video description below. No promises. There's a chance the internet's not going to be good enough for us to put together a good stream, but if they can figure out the technical aspects, I will hopefully be up there streaming it with Cocaster Endless. So that should be exciting, and I believe we're going to get started at about 6 a.m. Pacific, believe it or not, 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Which is, and just to be clear, in case you're watching this video after I upload it, that is tomorrow, aka the 16th of November, 2024. So if you're watching this video now and that's already happened, you know, check out the McClunky Gaming channel and see if you can get some VODs and stuff. And if you're watching it beforehand, tune in tomorrow. And if you're watching it tomorrow, hey, hop on over and see if we're live. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to you all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.